Welcome, everyone, to the International Conference on Consciousness-Based Leadership and Management. This is day one, session number 4, and we will be having a wonderful symposium connecting individual and spiritual mindsets. And let me make Isabel, all yours. You are the moderator of the panel. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, good afternoon to everybody. I am very excited with this session today. The invitation was to members of a group that exists for 7 years now. It's an international network of academics interested in developing a sustainability mindset. And here we have today 7 of our colleagues, and they come from very different places, very different backgrounds and disciplines. However, what they have in common is that they are all concerned about how can we develop, leverage our resources, how can we accelerate change towards a better world, how can we partner and share resources. So let me start introducing our first speaker, and you see it on the screen. We have the pictures of everybody, and Karthyeni Sridaran is our first speaker. We will have, the way it will work is every speaker will have 5 minutes to make a key point, and then after that I will invite the audience to take 30 seconds in silence. We will give that little break of 30 seconds so that you can collect your thoughts and write into the chat what is a thought or a question that you have for Karthyeni. And she will not answer it in the moment if we go to the next speaker, but before you forget what you were thinking about what she said, that is why we give you this 30 seconds of silence. Then the next speaker will be Dennis. And the same thing, when Dennis is done, we will have 30 seconds in silence just to collect your thoughts and write into the chat a comment, an insight, or a question for the presenter that just spoke. And so we will continue. And then when everybody had made their presentations, we go into questions, and we also, of course, will receive more questions from the audience. So let me give the stage to Karthyeni. Karthyeni Sridaran is connecting from Melbourne, Australia. It's in the morning in Melbourne. So thank you very much, Kathi, for being with us, and it's all yours.
Thank you, Isabel, for the lovely introduction. Fellow panelists, my distinguished fellow panelists, greetings to all of you, whether it's morning, noon, or afternoon, whichever part of the world you are. It's lovely to reconnect again. Today, I am speaking on the topic of the 5 spiritual foundations for a sustainable mindset. In this group, obviously, we have been discussing the concept for many years now, and sustainability, as we all know, is about the preservation and flourishing of life into the future. And I suppose the concept of mindset is very much one that's very linked and dependent upon our consciousness, our level of consciousness, as well as our understanding of what consciousness is. So when we come to about the 5 spiritual foundations, I was wanting to keep it simple and grounded, and because it tends to get very esoteric when we talk about spiritual concepts. And so I thought today we will try and keep it down to the 5 elements that make up life, not just our own lives, the lives of every species on planet Earth, as well as the entire living cosmos. So this is based on the yogic sciences, of course. It is which calls the 5 elements the Panchabhutas. And in this yogic tradition, the 5 elements is seen as the basis of all creation, including our physical bodies, as well as everything else in the cosmos. So one of the key things I thought we should try to remember while we are pursuing all kinds of sustainable issues in our physical world, we probably need to kind of reconcile that we exist in 2 dimensions simultaneously at every moment in time. And that is our physical, psychological dimensions, where we spend the most amount of time, particularly as scholars. As we know, we are all guilty of spending our time in ruminating in our minds most of the time, and rarely feeling the being of ourselves connected to the elements that make up who we really are at the existential level. And so I think it is worthy, I suppose, to kind of come back to the basics every now and then, and to have a sort of a practice or a ritual in our lives where we constantly remind ourselves of our connection to everything and everyone around us. And so we as humans can only flourish if we become conscious that our physical beings are essentially a combination of the basic formulas of earth, water, air, fire, and akash. So I was trying to think about what would be a way for me to broach this subject with everyone. And what came to my mind was my early childhood. I don't know about many of you, where we all very much live in city lives in artificial kind of environments, built up concrete jungles. And we rarely get the opportunity sometimes to be in touch with the natural world. And so when I looked back in my life, I am so blessed to have grown up in a small village when in my young days, when I was, that means less than 5 years old. I have such a real memory of this, because after that time, after that age, I moved to the city. But that memory that stayed with me so palpably, even till today, growing up in a little rubber plantation village where my parents were working, where my grandfather had a sundry shop. And every evening we had this ritual where the villagers would all in a community make their way to the river. And the river is where we all met. And through walking through this river, getting to the river for our daily baths, we were in complete connection with in the elements of the 5 elements. Walking on bare earth, we were all barefooted. Don't ask me why, although we had our footwear, nobody wore their footwear at that time. And getting into the river, playing in the river, splashing and feeling the water in the river, and walking through the forest and feeling the air and the fire of, the smell of fire burning, firewood burning when people are cooking. Now, these are all elements that kind of registered in my memory somewhere that, even today brings up such a palpable, beautiful memory for me. And recently I was, thinking about these 5 elements a little bit more deeply, and it is a clear understanding that how these 5 elements function within us is what makes who we are. Whether we are in a state of wellness or illness is very much dependent on these 5 elements. So
Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. I thought, just to wrap up, I just want to say that we should try ways in which to connect with the 5 elements on a daily basis. And that is what we want to bring into the education system if we like to become more sustainable in our minds as well.
Thank you very much for that story. What city, what country was that?
That was in Malaysia, in Malaysia where I grew up, yes.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Kathy. So we go, before we go to Dr. Dennis Heaton, let's take the 30 seconds where I invite you just to linger and say what insight came up for me that I would like to share in the chat. Could be a message or could be a question for Kathy.
Do I respond to the question now, Isabel?
No, not now. Thank you very much. We just make this pause because otherwise we go from one presenter to the next and there is not much of a cushion to connect with any thoughts or insights. So people can share it, but take a look at the chat, okay? So Dennis, welcome Dennis, Dr. Dennis Heaton. He's connecting from Maharishi International University in the US.
Well, thank you, Isabel. The proposition that individual and collective consciousness underlies a flourishing world runs through this conference. In this session, I'm describing one psychological measure of consciousness development that has been researched in relation to sustainability leadership, and proposing one physiological measure of consciousness development for flourishing. I hope to stimulate collaborations among those attending so that through empirical research, we can advance understanding and application of consciousness. Slide 1. I contributed a chapter in developing a sustainability mindset in management education, of which Isabel, our moderator for this session, was co-editor. This chapter explained findings about unprecedented psychological development in graduates of Maharishi International University, as measured by, among other measures, Levenger's test of ego development, which is now also called Leadership Development Profile of Action Logics. Researchers, including Barrett Brown and Olivier Boireau, have found that managers with advanced levels of ego development have a systems view of reality, create long-term visions with profound purposes, and build truly collaborative relationships. So ego development, AKA action logics, is one psychological measure of consciousness development related to flourishing. Second slide. Now I'd like to introduce the idea of using a physiological measure of brain functioning as a predictor of flourishing outcomes, building on the work of my colleagues, Harold Harung and Fred Travis. Dr. Travis is in the program tomorrow, 3 p.m. Central Time. Their book, World Class Brain, summarizes their findings that top performers in business, athletics, and music are characterized or distinguished by highly integrated brain functioning as measured by EEG. I suggest the differences in sustainability mindset will be found to be related to brain integration. As the figure on the right shows, under the word transcending, integrated brain functioning means the different parts of the brain produce signals that are coherently correlated with signals from other parts of the brain. I theorize that the capacity to take a systems perspective, seeing how parts of the social and physical world are integrated wholes, is a function of having an integrated brain. You can stop the slide, thanks. So, consciousness can be objectively researched using psychological and physiological indicators. What measures would you suggest to measure consciousness, to measure the development of consciousness in our management education students? Are you interested in continued dialogue and possible research collaborations with each other? If you have ideas or questions about research, please type them in the chat. Thank you.
Dennis, you made it 15 seconds short of your time. Thank you so much. And let's take this extra time to connect through the chat if you have some insights or you are interested in connecting with Dr. Heaton or any questions that you may have for him. Let's take that special time for it. Okay, thank you very much. Let's move to our next presenter, Dr. Alfredo Sfeir-Younis, who is connecting from Chile. Welcome, and he is part of the International Association of Educators for World Peace in Chile. Welcome, Alfredo.
Thank you very much. When I met the founder of this university, Maharishi Yogi, he told me that the great failure of economics was its concept of material scarcity, that economics has to become the economics of abundance, that economists have to bring into the economic analysis the unbounded nature of human consciousness. This is why I have spent all my life trying to bring spirituality into economics, politics, and business. The message I bring here today is twofold. First, that human flourishing, happiness, and transformation, and its leadership mindset demand individual flourishing, personal self-realization, and a simultaneous commitment to construct a unique form of collective livelihood and self-realization. We must aim at a society where we self-realize compassion, but at the same time, we commit ourselves to co-construct a compassionate society. Second is that human flourishing shall not be separated from nature's flourishing. They are mutually reinforced by the power of oneness and all the meaningful interaction between human collective consciousness and nature consciousness. This says that the relationship between inner ecology and outer ecology are inseparable. The last dimension, this inseparability, allows us to connect flourishness with the debate on sustainability mindset, where leadership is about oneself, others, and how others respond to our leadership. Others here, for me, includes human beings, sentient beings, and nature. A conscious sustainability leadership is about all expressions of life. Because of the power of citizens today, sustainability mindset will not surge really from pyramidal process or hierarchical institutions. The collective nature of leadership is compounded by so many planetary challenges no country will overcome on its own: COVID-19, climate change, security, peace, migration. Our vision has to go beyond individual forms of livelihood. Our life in this paradigm that I'm sharing is conditioned by the relative importance of collective consciousness, collective leadership, and collective livelihood. A move from individual self-governance to collective governance. Individual consciousness does not represent, is not a separate entity from collective consciousness. The notion of universal flourishing is similar to the Buddhist path to collective self-realization and enlightenment. Human flourishing is governed by the mantra, I am because you are because I am. Today, however, flourishing will never bring us to the maximum expression of well-being without being fully embedded in nature. Nature as a live entity, energy, behavior, memory, and consciousness. Human flourishing is the result of a multiple interaction between our collective consciousness and the consciousness of nature. That's why we have to speak about human and nature flourishing. Let me say that today we need to move beyond just an analysis of collective consciousness, individual consciousness, but take it as a totality so we can really address the issues and challenges of this planetary society we live today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alfredo, very encompassing. And I can see a thread already weaving together these different presentations, talking about the 5 elements, talking about the inner and the outer ecology. So let's do our 30 seconds of pause. And just as a quick anecdote, I introduced this a few days ago in a meeting of an initiative for the UN. And they said, oh, we will try it. We were just asking people if they had any questions. By giving these 30 seconds of silence, it was amazing how much productive, how much more we heard the voices of the audience. So I invite the people who are listening in to just take a chat and type in some comments, insights, or thoughts or questions for Alfredo before we go to our next presenter. Okay, fine. Alfredo, take a look at the chat. Everybody can look at that. And Kathy, also I invite you and Dennis to take a look at the chat if there are some questions that we can address when we finish with the presentations. So let's go to our next presenter. That is Dr. Julia Starberg Walker. And she's connecting from the US. She is with George Washington University. Hello and welcome, Julia.
Hello, and thank you, Isabel. Can everyone see me and hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome, wonderful. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good mid-afternoon, wherever you are in the globe. I'm very happy to be here. Isabel, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here. And to the universe, I give gratitude to the elders and wisdom keepers on whose lineages I carry forward. And I give thanks to those Indigenous friends and relations who have given me permission to use with honor and attribution the ideas of Indigenous scholars, activists, and writers. So today, my hope is to offer a deeply reverent view of sustainability. And I use the word reverence intentionally. It means a personal or communal or moral and ethical responsibility to sustain the web of life we are infused by. It means that we sustain life through a simple belief that all lives matter, and simple actions, honoring through some ceremony, individually or collectively, the sovereignty of life. Finally, it also means a recognition of the incredible miracle of our profound interdependence as a loving community. So in this reverential view, sustaining, the verb, is almost like a ceremony. Unfortunately, though, ceremony and ritual have been shunned in today's fast-paced, technology-driven world. In a time where everything seems to be explained by science, the magic of ceremony has been frowned upon and displaced. But if we consider our everyday actions of sustaining as a ceremonial act, I believe we can develop a deeper meaning, a stronger spiritual significance, and a louder call to action to protect the sovereignty of life. Sovereignty is usually a word associated with the political sphere, and in this context, it means the authority to govern itself. Recently, however, I came across another way to think about sovereignty when I was reading about Indigenous ways of knowing and spirituality. In this view, sovereignty extends to all beings, human and non-human. And sovereignty is about acknowledging that there is reciprocity woven between all material and non-material elements in the cosmos. From what I continue to learn from Indigenous elders in their writings, I understand that it is our right and responsibility as a living community to flourish. And because of our reciprocal relationship to all life, we then have an obligation to help all things flourish. So what is the connection between sovereignty and sustainability, and why might it matter to adopt a ceremonial or reverent view of sustainability? I turn now to Indigenous scientist Robin Wall Kimmerer in her book Braiding Sweetgrass, and she links sovereignty to sustainability and ceremony when she discusses the respect and reverence she has when she takes a life, a plant or an animal, whether for food or for making baskets. She is guided by the belief that all things are sovereign, that all things exist in an interdependent web, and she honors and gives thanks, meaning she has a ceremony, for a fish she catches for dinner, for the sweetgrass she harvests for the basket, or the maple syrup she taps from the maple tree. Because she believes in the sovereignty of all beings, she has a reverence for life. This compels her to protect and sustain the web, even though she needs to end life for her own survival. Thus, in this view, sovereignty, reverence, and ceremony all contribute to sustaining the web of life. So I'd like to read a short paragraph from her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, because she's such a beautiful and powerful voice. She writes, I am the woman with the basket, and how I fill it is a question that matters. If we are fully awake, a moral question arises as we extinguish other lives around us on behalf of our own. Whether we are digging wild leeks or going to the mall, how do we consume in a way that does justice to the lives that we take? In our oldest stories, we are reminded that this was a question of profound concern for our ancestors. When we rely deeply on other lives, there is an urgency to protect them. Our ancestors, who had so few material possessions, devoted a great deal of attention to this question, while we who are drowning in possession scarcely give it a thought. The cultural landscape may have changed, but the conundrum has not. The need to resolve the inescapable tension between honoring life around us and taking it in order to live is part of being human. The need to resolve the inescapable tension between honoring life around us and taking it in order to live is part of being human. I think that ceremony might be the key to helping us resolve this tension. Ceremony helps us honor what we take, and it reminds us to protect enough for the vitality and flourishing of future generations. A reverent understanding of sustainability, grounded in a belief of the sovereignty of all, can help us as a community be good ancestors for the generations to come. Thank you.
Sorry, I was talking to Julia, so Julia cannot hear me, but no, I was not, I was muted. Where is this author from? Where is she from?
So this woman is Robin Wall Kimmerer. She is a botanist at SUNY State University of New York. She wrote this book, Braiding Sweetgrass, and I am telling about it to everyone. And also I would suggest buy the book and get the audio tape so you can, oh, there you go, awesome, awesome. And you can hear her voice as she's reading it. So it's just wonderful.
Thank you very much. So many images are here. Okay, so let's take our 30 seconds of pause and write into the chat some images that come into your mind after hearing what Julia had to share, or questions. Okay, thank you very much. And let's go to our next speaker. It is Dr. Travis Cox. These were the slides that Julia wanted to share, but she didn't. There we are. Dr. Travis Cox from Naropa University, also the US. Welcome, Travis.
Thanks, Isabel. And thanks, MUM, for the conference. I was a professor at MUM for 7 years, about 5 years ago. And so this is a bit of a homecoming. And so it's been great to interact with Dennis and Anil. And then I'm excited for the opportunity that Isabel gave us through LEAP. And so I'm grateful to be here. Although I feel a bit late to the party in the sense that Naropa has a Joanna Macy Center. If you don't know Joanna Macy, she's a Buddhist scholar, a systems thinker, and an environmental and nuclear activist. After I submitted this idea for a talk, she gave a talk at Naropa on the Buddhist conception of dependent co-arising. It was based on a chapter in her book, World is Lover, World is Self. The chapter is called Self and Society. And in it, what she does is she talks about the dependent co-arising of phenomenon, right? And so she's really trying to zero in on the way that certain conceptions of self also give birth to particular institutions. And so it spoke to what I'm about to speak to, which is old conceptions of self seem to have given rise to our old ideas around what institutions can be. And I think what we're talking about with a sustainability mindset is a new conception of self, at least in, as it applies to a modern Western kind of conception of self. And so then new institutions that hopefully will co-arise with that. When I taught at MUM, the praxis bit of teaching was kind of covered because we were on the block system. So we taught one class a month, 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, which gave us the opportunity to go to conferences, to go to other institutions, and to take on hands-on projects. But at Naropa, we're in a traditional semester system. And so, but students were really clamoring for more hands-on praxis-based projects. And so I was trying to figure out why that was, given the limitations of the semester system relative to MUM. And I came up with 3 things. One is just kind of the theory that happens at Naropa, in addition to having a contemplative-based pedagogy, similar to MUM, meditation and contemplative practices as a part of the school, but also concepts like Thich Nhat Hanh's interbeing, or Adrienne Marie Brown and her ideas of transformative justice and collective liberation. Those things are inherently, our senses of self expand, so that then when you're confronted with societal and environmental issues, if your sense of self is as large as those beings, the societies that we're in and the nature that we are connected to, then if you grasp those concepts, taking action to ameliorate the suffering that exists is a form of self-preservation with the self writ large, right? Another part of our curriculum is the relationship between service and spirituality, right? There are so many spiritual traditions that have at the root of their practices and their theory service, whether that's Gandhi or Mother Teresa. Being of service to life on this planet is a part of the spiritual path. And when it comes to sustainability, I think that John Ehrenfeld in his book Flourishing, but even more so in his book Sustainability by Design, he talks about care as the nature of being that then facilitates flourishing. And it's because of this care that kind of gets instilled in our students that then forces them to want to take action. And then the last one has been brought up by other people in this session, which is systems thinking, which I also think is at the heart of sustainability. And so, if I'm just using Donella Meadows as a shorthand, when she talks about the 3 components of the system, sure, you have objects, but then you also have the relationship between those objects and the goal of the system, right? And then even when she talks about leverage points, she has kind of a diagram like this. And at the bottom of these leverage points, where stocks and flows are at the top, but at the bottom of the leverage points are mindsets. And so again, like even when you're talking about something as material as systems thinking, at the root of it is these mindsets that have at the heart of them, interbeing and non-duality and collective liberation. And so I think by the very nature of Dr. Alfredo saying that he's trying to bring spirituality into management and to economics for all these years, by the very nature of bringing those concepts into these spaces And enlarging our conceptions of self, it then requires action because it's a sense of self-preservation that is larger than the skin encapsulated ego that gets, constantly reaffirmed in modern Western cultures. And so, yeah. Yep.
Can we do a halt there? Is that okay? Good. So thank you very much. And let's take our 30 seconds of going inside. And what questions do you have? What challenging thoughts do you have after hearing what Travis was sharing with his experience in Naropa students? Okay, thank you very much. And let's go then to our next presenter. This is Alba Torres. Alba is connecting from Curitiba, Brazil, and she's a consultant and a leadership skills coach. And also she has been part of this network of scholars interested in developing a sustainability mindset for many years. Welcome, Alba.
Hi, everyone. Grateful for the opportunity to be here with all of you. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, MIU. The idea is to share some of what I have experienced and learned over the years supporting managers and students on their journey of developing their leadership skills. Do you have the slide, Isabel?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So we are talking about conscious leadership and personal values. Yes, that's okay. Great. So what you learn about leadership? Leadership in short term is the ability to influence others. And also by experience and all in the ancient textbooks and in recent researches that we need to lead yourself first in order to lead others. We have to influence people by our example. So the biggest power of influence is the authentic person. And what is an authentic person? Authenticity is a value. Is when your beliefs and your behaviors are aligned with what is really important to you, your values, our values. So if you are an authentic person, you are going to influence people and they make them or inspire them to also seek to flourish themselves. So that's why it's so important, the self-awareness. Know our values that drive our choice and influence our interaction with other people, with nature, with life in general. And we see that, all these years work with this, I know that it's not easy to make this recognition about what are my values. It's easy to talk, but not easy to really grab the recognition. So, of course, this difficulty varies a lot about depends on the culture, depends on the educational process to which a person has kept in touch since his childhood. You know, so one thing that helped me a lot to in my journey to develop myself was the stories, ancient stories of wisdom, and looking this story and try to identify, to recognize the values in the story. And after learning how to do that with these stories, I start to do it with my own story. What values I can identify on my own story. Here are some values in this square that is from the MIU website. And this is something that is can inspire us to a reflection. Are they, these values are my values also? How I can welcome, for example, harmony with nature and togetherness as my core values, and then strengthen my sustainability mindset. So the kind of reflection you can do. Next, please, Isabel. So the next slide, please. Yeah, so I'd like to share with you an exercise that I do with my students, with the managers, and in order to make contact with their values. So there is two ways to do this. The first way is the way I call step backward. You can choose a result that a situation that's already finished in the present or in the past, and you identify the results. Okay, it was the best result, better than I expected, or could be better. And then I take a step backwards. What action move I did that contributes to these results? After the reflection, and another step backwards. Okay, what was my choice? Why I choose this action specifically? What is that? What was I think at that time? Well, okay. And then I take another step back to make a contact with this source, my values, my belief, my aspirations. That was the really moving me to all this process. So it's important to make this contact with love for truth and delicacy with yourself. So you need to make a pause also in order to listen really our hearts, not to overthink things, you know. This is the way, step backward. And we have the other way, step forward. We are going to...
Okay, 30 more seconds.
Okay, the step forward is the other way. You have a future situation and you reflect the decision you have to do, say what values are going to move me, to give me meaning to all the efforts I have to do until achieve the result. So you go the other way, you know? So backwards or forwards. It's a way to develop your conscious about what are your real values in action.
Thank you very much, Alba. So in actions, we will do a chat in action. So what are some thoughts or insights that you have from what Alba just shared? Questions? Let's take 30 seconds again. Okay, thank you very much. And let's go to our next presenter. Oops. Oh. This is Charlie Young. Charlie is connecting from the US. He's with Southern Connecticut State University, and he will present about cultivating personal empowerment through insight meditation. So how do you do that, Charlie? Welcome.
Thank you, Isabel, and thank everybody. I'm very glad to share my practices of contemplative practice that I've been using in my class to enhance students' empowerment and their sense of happiness. So, since the publication of Ford Foundation and Carnegie Corporation report in 1959, business education has eagerly adopted the positivistic philosophy of science and rigorous scientific method to legitimize business schools' presence with the modern research university. In order to attain the status and social standing of a profession like medicine and law, business education has put a great emphasis on the acquisition of scientific and technical knowledge through sophisticated modeling and quantitative analysis. As a consequence, reflective and contemplative elements of management education, which help cultivate and heighten student self-awareness and practical wisdom, have been relatively underappreciated. Furthermore, as mindfulness has indeed moved from fringe to mainstream in recent years, it has gained increasing attention among business practitioners. Intriguingly, however, management educators have been hesitant to refine or extend the modes of the first-person approach toward knowledge-making through introspection. As a side note, I was first introduced to the book The Tao of Physics, written by Friedrich Capra, published in 1975, and The Leadership and the New Science by Margaret Whitley, published in 1992, when I was an undergraduate management student in South Korea during the late 1980s. Now, after more than 3 decades later, I teach management course in the United States, but I have hardly found any mention of a conscious-based leadership or quantum leadership in popular OB textbook. Neither have my colleagues who have been teaching OB at my institution. So why is it so slow for management academics to adopt so-called new paradigm of leadership? This is part of the reason why I have created an undergraduate management elective course, Mindful Leadership, a few years ago. Contemplation is essentially of self-learning through which one learns to trust one's own intuitive processes. Yet a typical undergraduate business student at my institution and enrolled in my class tend to take 5 major courses while working for about 35 and 40 hours a week. For instance, as you can see in the slide, this is a very authentic and honest reflection of an undergraduate business student when he actually wrote his first mindfulness journal. In addition, most American students often have very negative stereotypes of meditation or mindfulness, such as called WAS, W-A-S, weird Asian stuff, at least in the beginning of a semester. So I have adopted 3 textbooks to provide them some basic information about mindfulness and meditation, including Mindfulness, an 8-week plan for finding peace in a frantic world by Williams and Penman, and Coming to Senses, Healing Ourselves Through the World Through Mindfulness by John Kabat-Zinn, and The Emotionally Intelligent Managed by Caruso and Salvi, published in 2004. Given that mindfulness is an embodied practice, students are assigned to practice meditation at home as well as in class for about 15 weeks and submit their meditation journal at the end of semester. Next slide, Isabel, please. And they are also assigned to visit art museum to hone their perception and observational skills and submit their contemplative essay on their aesthetic experience at art museums. And one of the key learning outcomes of this course is the cultivation of a student attentive inner awareness through first-person investigation. And overall learning artifacts have shown that meditation and art appreciation as a practice of self-care have been effective in terms of enhancing students' perceived sense of personal empowerment at the end of the semester. Thank you.
And I have had the privilege to follow some of the stories, Charlie, of how you use it with the students and the impact it has. So for those that are listening in, type in your comments or your questions for Charlie. Wonderful stories coming up there. So other 30 seconds, and then we will open the Q&A section. Okay, so now we are starting the next part of our session where we would like to address some questions and maybe go into some details related to the things that our presenters have shared. I would ask you, Kathy, if you had a chance to take a look at the chat box, if there was a question that you wanted to respond to. And I will ask you to be brief relatively, because we will have one person after the other sharing some of the answers, okay?
Thank you, Isabel. I do have some good questions that has come up and some good insights from Deborah, Dennis, Judy, and so forth. One question that I like to address here quickly, which I think encapsulates everyone's question too, is that the need to maintain this connection. How do we do it? So one is the question of how, and the other is why. I suppose the why is very obvious to all of us because it is a living, intelligent universe, and we know that we're all a part of this existential self. And so I think the question I like to address most is the simple ways and techniques in which we can do it. We must start where we are, with ourselves first and foremost. Particularly those of us in teaching in classrooms, we should set the examples, I guess, for the students and share and self-disclose the little things that we do to maintain these connections with Mother Earth, water, air, fire, and Akash, the term that Deborah asked, it simply refers to, is interpreted as space, but it's more than space. It's the intelligent space that holds all of us. So it is the universal energy that is sustaining that Akashic knowledge that is referred to in the yogic tradition. So simple things that we can do is to just step out into the garden and start gardening and touching the soil and sand and nature and land in every simple way that we can. I started by growing my first batch of spinach in a small container in my balcony this semester, and I shared it with everybody I knew, and simple things, inspiring stories like that, to appreciate, not to look at these items as commodities for our exploitation, but rather that they are our part of our living world and our living selves. And so the more we include these things to bring the consciousness that we are part of this living self, the respect for nature, whether it is through ritual, through honor and all kinds of practices, whether it's indigenous, old or new practices, meditation, mindfulness. These are all ways in which we try to maintain our connection to the 5 elements. And when we respect the nature, I guess then the harm to harm the nature that is us becomes harder. And that is the connection to sustainability. So that is the main point that I like to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I invite those that wrote the questions in the chat, if you put there your email address, the presenter may address unanswered questions that we didn't have time to see here. Dennis, I would like to turn to you. Were there any questions in the chat that you would like to address?
Yeah, I got a question from Jerry Beaverman. And can you go back to my first slide?
Okay, let me do that. I think I can do that.
So I mentioned a psychological measure called action logics, ego development or self-development. And Jerry said, what's that got to do with sustainability? So I just want to connect the dots a little bit more. These capabilities of systems thinking, long-term visions, and collaborative relationships are critical skills for sustainability, actually derived them from a book by Senge on the necessary revolution.
Revolution.
But they're also mentioned in the research by Barrett Brown, where he did two things. He gave this psychological test to a group of managers, and then through qualitative analysis, he found out how they look at sustainability issues. And those who had the higher levels of development were more inclined to look at things with this systems view, and those who did not have that or other capabilities. So that's it.
Thank you very much. And it is very much in line with the 12 principles of sustainability mindset. Systems, definitely systems perspective is one of the content areas with long-term understanding patterns and cyclical flow, and both unthinking to bridge the dualistic thinking that we are so much used to. And okay, so let me move on. Alfredo, do you have any questions that you found in the chat that you would like to address?
Yes, Isabel, thank you very much. There are several questions, but I will not go one by one to save the time. And I like to point at three major things. The first one, I want to share my experience in my presidential campaign. I was a candidate to the presidency of Chile in 2013. People thought that sustainability mindset was something of the future, that sustainability was not in the top of the agenda. And essentially one of the slogans against the campaign was, come back 30 years from now. I'm telling you this because many people think that this is a done deal. I don't think it's a done deal. Sustainability must be also understood as a form of consciousness. This is very important, a form of collective consciousness where people not only see the earth as a thing, but the earth as a being. Once that changes, and it's an experience, it's not a slogan, it's an experience, then things change fundamentally. The second point, and I love Travis' statement on, on what I'm doing with economics and business, but I want to say something. To transform economics, it's not only to transform economists. I mean, we need to transform society. And one of the concepts in Buddhism that is an excellent vehicle to make that transformation is the so-called right livelihood. We need to find out a way to live in this planet that is different. And the next point is that, you know, I was asked about frameworks for collective awareness. I will just list them just to give people an idea. First, we live in the era of citizenry. Today, there is no doubt the hundreds of worldwide movements. Just think about Greta Thunberg, you know, the Occupies, you know, the Indignados in Spain, the Arab Spring, and so on. We cannot move away from the fact that collective consciousness has its own dynamic. The second point is that I am practicing a lot community spirituality. That is to say, not only group meditation, but spirituality in a large sense. And that is a tremendous impact on people as well as on the communities. The other thing is experiential education. We need to have a revolution in values. We live today in a crumbling down system of individualistic and materialistic values. This has to change. This is not new for anyone in this conference, but I have to say it because I run all the time in economics, politics, and social with this issue that collective, you know, values is a utopia, you know, justice, truth. It's just something for you guys in the academia. The other instrument for collective awareness is seva, you know, service. Most of the people that don't know a spiritual path, that don't have all this sophistication we have put together today and maybe tomorrow and after tomorrow, is just to serve the other is a tremendous form of increasing collective consciousness. And I am a Buddhist, a practitioner, and I practice social Buddhism. That is to say, I go into my path of individual consciousness. I need to self-realize compassion, for example, but I have to commit simultaneously to the creation of a compassionate society. And last, and I finish quickly, Isabel, is that I was asked about the Maharishi effect. I think I don't have the time to say, but I want to say a few sentences. First, the Maharishi effect is the way group meditation affects coherence in the collective, how individual meditation affects collective meditation, and how collective meditation affects individual meditation. I was taught directly by Maharishi about this Maharishi effect, and I participated in several experiments that were done, one in Washington, D.C., with the square root of 1% of the population, with high levels of collective meditation, you can change all the index, social, economic, and business. So I thank this, and I am prepared to continue this dialogue with anyone who is really interested in this collective consciousness, collective mindset, because I think there is something there to be discovered. And being in politics and in economics, for me, that is very important to learn from you and probably share some experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I was, Anil, there was a person that was raising the hand, but I cannot locate it on the dashboard. I don't know where that is and how to activate that. Anil, are you there?
I'm here, but I don't know how to activate the hand. I mean, you can look at the hand, but right now the person is gone. You can look at as well as I do.
Okay, because it was something like with SH. Anyway, if you're there, please raise your hand again or write it into the chat box so we don't miss it. Thank you so much. And Alfredo, I wish I was in Chile that time. I want you as a president. Imagine a president with that vision. It's true that it was maybe 30 years ahead of time, but well.
Was that election lost by one vote? Maybe your vote. I'm saying, was that election lost just by one vote? If you had been there, he could have won.
By one vote, yeah, my vote. Okay, so Julia, I am curious, did you pick up some questions or insights in the chat that you would like to react to?
Yes, I have a couple that I think will be quick because I don't really have answers. I just have like excitement. So Travis asked, I'm wondering if you thought about connecting sovereignty with autopoiesis. And I just think that's fabulous. It lit my brain on fire. But I was thinking actually of sympoiesis, Donna Haraway's idea of developing with rather than an independent like self-organizing. Yeah, so I'm going to explore that. It's on my to-do list after I finish papers and chapters and things like that. And then one of the participants, Chinmay, asked, ceremony and honoring lives and nature where we draw our livelihood is a beautiful thought, but for millennials, ceremony could often feel as an imposing act. So how could this concept be instilled in our future generation mind effectively? And I really appreciate this question, and I don't have an answer, but I have a sense. And what came to me is this idea of serving or service or kind of a humble offering is the way that I would approach the ceremony. Rather than a typical ceremony as tradition, like I think of, like, for example, very codified religious performances that are a little separating and they're a little performative and maybe they're ritualistic, but they're really not getting your heart. There's that kind of ceremony, but the ceremony that I'm suggesting is really to be of service. And so I'm wondering, I would like to ask you, maybe to reach out to me later to get more understanding about what this imposing act is in terms of the millennial perspective. But when I think of being in service to something greater than me, like Mother Earth or Gaia or Source, then the worries that I have is because I'm a critical feminist scholar, I don't like, tradition, but those concerns and worries go away when I really put on the mentality of being of service. So I hope that might be helpful.
Thank you very much. Anil, just a little question. How many more minutes do we have?
I think it's about 10 minutes.
Okay, perfect. We will use them all. So who is there? Travis, were there any questions in the chat that you would like to respond?
Yeah, there were two. One is from Judy. She asked, what are some examples of how our students integrate service and spirituality? We actually have a class called Transpersonal Service Learning. And I'll just give an example really quick of this. The textbook that we use, it's old, it's from the 80s, but it's Ram Dass, How Can I Help, right? Where he breaks down the conception of self in kind of, I would say now it's like a colonial way, right? Like I'm going to impose, again, that word, the imposition, I'm going to impose what I think you need from that, as opposed to like the spiritual act of service, which is just showing up with no expectations and just being of service. And so one of the funny examples is we had a student volunteer at an equine therapy center, so horse-based therapy center, and she was just mucking out stalls, right? Like she was just shoveling horse poop, and she got angry and then noticed herself getting angry and noticing the way that the horses would react to her in that state, and then used it as a contemplative experience and started to try to, just be fully embodied in the present moment. And even just by doing that, the way the horses related to her completely switched, which is why she wanted to do it in the first place, is like be in relationship to the horses. And so it's just, really using those like spiritual mindful tools of the present moment to then be of service in the way that even your relationship to service and the people that you're serving changes as a result of the mindset. So that was Judy's question. And then Dennis's question was, do students find that the organization of Naropa lives the values that they're learning in the studies? I think it's been that way in the past, but certainly in the 5 years that I've been here, relative to our kind of global collective moment of this rise of fascism again, across the world, and then COVID-19 and these like experiences of isolation, and then in America, the resurgence of Black Lives Matter after the murder of George Floyd. There's this awareness that, again, the institution that we're a part of, the hierarchical nature of having a board and a president, the way that like students, staff, and faculty don't have a body where we get together and talk and are able to share in solidarity the issues that we are facing. I think that the students are on the verge right now of demanding that actual structures of the organization change to better suit the kind of way of being that they want to see in the world and what we're teaching them. And so it's a very potent time to be alive in higher education, is my experience.
Thank you very much, Travis.
Thank you.
What city is Naropa University?
Boulder, Colorado.
Boulder, okay. Thank you very much. I need to go back there. So Alba, tell me, were there any questions in the chat that you would like to address?
Yes, a question about the range of age of my students.
Mm-hmm.
So most of them are on business school, postgraduate student. The range will be from 28 years old to 42, something like that, And the exercise works well with all of them. And I had very few experience with teenagers. And as a volunteer work with teenagers. And before this exercise, step back, step forward, I started with them a story, a very ancient story, and they reflect about the values from the story. And then afterwards, we start this exercise about themselves, their lives until then, the teenagers. And that works well. They could connect the reflection and the insights came from the story with the insight with the exercise. I think that with teenagers, it doesn't work if you go directly to the exercise. We have to to give
Yeah.
something more to reach them.
Yeah.
You know, but it works well. And another comment, what about if I am familiar with the Forbes action inquiry that is similar with this exercise I present. No, I didn't know about this inquiry. And thank you for the question. I'm going to look for it now.
Thank you very much, Alba. And we have 3 more minutes. And Charlie, I wanted to ask you if you picked up something in the chat box that you would like to address.
Yes, Denise asked me about a main principle for fostering universal flourishing. And I think I like that question because it's a huge question. I don't think I have an answer, but I have a glimpse of it because would you go to the last sort of a slide of my presentation, Isabel?
No.
Next one, yes. As some of you recognize, this painting is by a French impressionist one. I cannot remember.
Gauguin?
Yes, Gauguin. The title is Where Do We Come From, Where We Are Now, and Where Are We Going? So my principle, from my perspective, is to regain some sense of beauty. So aesthetic feeling and a time for contemplation is, at least from my perspective, a major primary principle for individual and collective flourishing. So we need to slow down. That's my sort of a lesson for my student. But anyhow, that would be my partial and biased sort of answer to Denise's question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I, again, for people that wrote into the chat, if you're interested in questions that were not fully addressed or contact any of the presenters, post your email into the chat box and then you will be contacted. Okay, so I think that we reached our time. Anil, my overall time manager, how are we doing?
You're doing great. You are great.
So what do you
right.
want?
Okay, I would just want to hear from you. What do you think are the 2 takeaways from your session right now?
You know, I keep writing keywords as I was listening to my colleagues. And there were a few threads, like red threads I mentioned in the beginning. There was something that I was hearing about connecting human nature with nature, how we are part of nature. And then I saw a movement towards a more cosmocentric perspective, which was very interesting because normally in our conversations, we go from egocentric to maybe planet-centric or sociocentric. And here I heard for the first time in 2 different moments, these mentions about our cosmocentric. And really, I love it how we are expanding our scopes of attention, our scopes of caring more and more. Obviously, we have to go from the macro to the micro because then we have a teenager that doesn't understand what we're talking about and we have to be very concrete and we cannot do cosmocentrism in the classroom. But that was one of the things that I picked up and I was delighted to hear about that. And the other, I love this, a few phrases, inner and external ecology. I love that. The back to basics. And there was another one that I wrote down. Start with yourself. Lead yourself first, where you are. And the reverence. I think these were very powerful words that when I heard them, they even create some feelings. When I hear reverence, it's not just letters, it creates a dimension. It's a 3-dimensional word. I cannot explain it better. And then very concrete, when you said, Alba, lead yourself first. When we are thinking, what are the technologies for developing more conscious-based leaders? Start with yourself, so basic. So I love that, where you are. And I want to share a little story. I hear this many times from students or people in the audience that say, well, you know, but what difference can I make, because I am only this, I own only so much power. It's the rich and the powerful and the politicians and the governments of the world and the multinationals who have to make the change. And the other day, my sister's grandson, who is 4, stayed overnight with her, and he looked at the faucet that was leaking, and he says, "You're damaging the planet." Next morning, her husband, the first thing is that we will fix that faucet today. That faucet had been leaking for over a week, and he wouldn't get to do it. He heard his 4-year-old saying, "You're damaging the planet," and off he went. And so I was thinking, the 4-year-old doesn't know of his power or the lack of power. He just says it, and look at the power that this has. So I think we always underestimate our own scope of influence, our own power, and we outsource it, we delegate it, and then we feel powerless. We have been giving it away by ourselves. So if we can go back to this center and say, oh, maybe I have more power than I think. So that these were some of my thoughts.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think cosmos-centering and connecting inside to outside and the power of the child. In fact, if I can take her to steal some of the thunder of the group that you will see in group 9, exactly this time tomorrow, the dialogic panel, I think it'll begin with this idea, your words have more power than you think. Now, it's not just for the kid.
Yeah.
It'll begin with that, the idea that when you dialogue, and you have so much influence, we just don't realize how much our words matter.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you very much. If I were to summarize, maybe I would say exactly those points. I wrote down 2 things for me. One is this idea, I think Karthyeni started in the beginning with this of connecting with nature, which I think, Isabel, you picked up, and you can say cosmocentricity, various elements of nature, and you talked of inner and outer. But the inner part for me became the second point, which is the development of consciousness, right, within yourself, at various levels. And then it sort of goes even to the Maharishi effect when you do not only at the individual level development of consciousness, group consciousness, in which it works at that level where human mind cannot comprehend, but the thing works. The research is there. And that you can hear again on 3 p.m. tomorrow. David Om Johnson, who's done a lot of the research on this, is the lead person, right, on it. He will be speaking along with Fred Travis, who was presenting on brain integration, how that happens. And the lady, you'll see a lot more about why the resistance is there and what do people say, why they don't want to believe in a Maharishi effect and what can be done. So that is the big challenge for us, that we know group activity works, but how do we make it palatable to a lot of people?
Okay, well,
all right, thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure doing